Welcome to the first book review being done by the Mere Mortal crew. This is a new sort of format for me, so I'm going to experiment with this a little bit, and Juan should be joining me shortly in his own book review for the first time. And the reason we want to do this is, I suppose both of us have enjoyed reading, and I know for me particularly, I get a lot of wisdom from books, and being a more solitary pursuit, one that I feel I can reflect on more, with getting knowledge from other people, from podcasts, from direct experience. It can be quite easy to just get caught up in the momentum of going through normal life and not taking that step back. And what I've found is a lot of times while reading, I can read something and then just sit and reflect for a little bit. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. So I'm going to try and, do a little bit of a book review for the first time, see how it goes, and, potentially can be a recurring segment of the Mere Mortal media. And we'll see what the reaction is, see how I enjoy it, if I enjoy doing it directly to the camera. Normally the camera's over here and I'm speaking with Juan, so, it's a bit of a different experience, but let's see how we go. So, first we've got is The Island, not The Island by Aldous Huxley. Hope I pronounced that right. It's always thought it was Aldous Huxley of Brave New World fame. And so this is the second book I've read of him, obviously the first being Brave New World. And it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, but in parts. So first of all, I'll just go over some of the basic details of it. It's 336 pages and was written in 1962, 30 years after the Brave New World. And while just going through Wikipedia and learning a bit more about it, I saw that this was a book that was always in the coming. In Brave New World, he had, I'll skip to right into it, assuming the audience has read that. With the Savage, he says, so the Savage gets brought back into the world of the alphas and betas and the world of Soma and that sort of, I guess, socialist, gone mad, very strict but very liberal as well. So they're very open sexually but in a very strict sort of way. And the Savage came from where they're just living in mud huts and have no technology, no sort of progress, I guess. And one thing that Huxley did say was in the intro to that is he wished that the Savage had a third choice, somewhere in between those two extremes, where you can find the balance, where you can get the beauty of nature, but also the technological process of healthcare and things like that. So this book was his attempt at, I suppose, writing a utopia of sorts in not complete, but in contrast to Brave New World. So it was written 30 years afterwards, and it tells the basic story of a Englishman called Will Farnaby, who goes to the island of Pala, and he's basically there on a mission to further the interests of his boss, Joe Aldehyde, who didn't even need to mention that because he's a very secondary character. He's basically there to further the interest of his boss in securing the oil of this very. The island has many reserves of oil and is technically wealthy with all that oil, but they choose not to use it. And basically, he goes there. He hurts himself, and sets the scene for him staying there for a while. And what happens is he gradually learns more about the Balinese culture and how they run things there. And so he goes through this. He learns about the history, which only, I think it commenced 3 or 4 generations before him, as in age and people, the first, I guess, ruler of Pala and one of the first Westerners to come in, and they sort of have this blending, this merging of the wild side of nature and then also the technological process of the industrial revolution technologies and how that pushes humanity forward as well. And the book basically tries to intermingle these, and it's Huxley's attempt at, I guess, exposing a utopia. I think I actually had read another book of his called Doors of Perception. So this is actually the third of his books I've read. And in that, he goes into the depths of the psychedelic experience and meditation and that sort of framing of the mind, or how things can change in the mind. And so in that, you can see a lot of the influence of his own psychedelic experiences in this book, and how he tries to, I suppose, reconcile those with the world that we live in as well. I've split it into the three parts of how I experienced the book. The first third was basically a backdrop and an intro for the, I suppose, staging of the scenery of why he's there and why we're reading the book. So I didn't find anything too crazy in that bit. It's basically, there are some books for me personally where things will just hit me, and I didn't experience any of that in the first third of the book. The second third, interestingly enough, came across as very preachy and a little bit new agey, has a little bit of that woo-woo in it. So in that section, he's being shown around the island, and he's going to their education system, for example, and they're explaining, okay, so in this way, in our system, the kids focus a lot more on the ground-based project, I suppose, subjects, and then we go into the the niche specialities of it. And so at times it came across as, just very preachy, and I suppose one of the reasons it was comparing it to my culture, which is very English in nature, that Western sort of capitalistic, you go through it and it's almost like you're being produced as a worker, I suppose. I don't feel there's that much focus on the individual in our system, or interestingly enough, maybe too much focus on the individual in some particular cases. But in their system, it's more about introspection and finding that mix between you being an individual and having your own wants, desires, needs, and also the functioning of a civil society where people can get along, and the practical nature, the pragmatic nature of having a state is fulfilled as well. So in it, they do a lot of comparing between, the imperialistic British and how they will get involved in other people's business. They go over to colonize India. They go over, they've got their sort of tentacles spreading out into the world, whereas they compare themselves as an island nation, in which they are, to, I suppose they just come across as very preachy, as very holier than thou, in when they're directly speaking to Will, and he goes along with it because he has been a bit embittered by his own experiences in the world, and he is very, very, very keenly aware of the flaws as well in his own system and how his own world operates. In the book, he compares everyone to maggots. Essentially, he hits this point where everywhere he just sees maggots. He sees maggots in business clothes. He sees maggots going for a Sunday stroll. He sees maggots eating in the restaurants. So he has become very embittered, and you can see this in his own characteristics. He has this hyena laugh that he is not only proud of, not only aware of, but proud of. And he also is a very keen intellect, but he uses it in pursuits of journalistic, following wars, promoting the darker sides of human nature, I guess. And he also will not take yes for an answer. So a play on the old sort of business strategy, I will never take no for an answer. He never takes yes for an answer. And in that, he's trying to express that, I suppose, the world is a bitter, dark, cruel cruel place, and anywhere that has a, I suppose, little sunshine of hope, he'll try and dampen that down. And you can see that in his style. He's got a very sarcastic sort of way of speaking, and always constantly jiving, like, poking and trying to bring people down, I suppose. But he is also very, very smart. He's very well put together and witty, and so he has that sort of balance of a normal, healthy person, but just with this darker side of them that expresses themselves in everything they do. So he agrees with them in a lot of ways, and I suppose one of the parts of the book is him gradually seeing how these people manage to operate in the world in a much more healthier way, and in ways that he could see he would have benefited from if he had grown up in that culture. The other part is where it gets into a bit more of the woo-woo, and so he reads the what's it called? It's like the founding, the philosophy or the way of notes written by one of the Palanese kings or royalty, I suppose, of this island, and one of the founders. And so they have a lot of the Buddhist philosophy in there, but it's not strictly a Buddhist nation. Like, they don't have the religion as their core. It's one of the things that make up part of this nation. And when he's going through, he gets given this notebook, and while he's going through the book, his story, his adventure, he reads parts of these notes in sections here and there, and so they're spread out through the book, mostly in the first sort of end of the first third and through the second third. And for me, I struggle a lot with these types of things. I've never gotten into the New Age philosophy, and interestingly enough, I feel one of the reasons for that is I am very gullible by nature. I remember a lot of times at school would always falling for that trick. Oh, gullible's written on the roof. Oh, you can find gullible in the dictionary. And I tend to just believe people at their word. I don't, if I'm not actively thinking about it. So I suppose my default nature is just to believe what people say. And that's actually, in an interesting way, has immuned me to a lot of the New Age philosophy, a lot of the things that can't be scientifically proved. And I do have an immense appreciation for the subjective experience of people and of myself. But I am wary of how that can be translated into not deterministic, the world of atoms and people. And so just reading that, it would say things like the way of the universe will flow through you. Let me see if I can find an exact passage of something that it says. But for me, it just I just really, really struggle with things that they just doesn't feel. I can't use it in a way that. So here we go. Oh no, that was actually just a quote from another thing. I'm looking actually for now the bits written in italics where. All right, I'm struggling to find it right at the moment. Anywho, that was a waste of time. It has parts where it'll be the way the universe flows through you, the interconnectedness of all is one, but one cannot become one of all. And that sort of language where it's very hard to just pin it down to know what they mean. It feels like they're obfuscating the actual meaning of what they're trying to get past. And if they're not sure of it, which could happen and definitely happens all the times, I feel it should be something you can't say in a preaching way. You got to get your thoughts down and write it out properly, especially if you're writing it out, because that's when you can read it, reread it, and see how it comes across. So, for example, for me now, I'm just trying to express my thoughts on the book, and it's coming out how it comes to my head. But if I was doing like a proper book review and writing it down on the internet and, sending it out as a blog, I would want to be going over that numerous times and clarifying exactly what I meant by it, so that if someone read it and another person read it, they could both read it and come to the general sense of what I was trying to say. With these sorts of things, I feel it just, you could go off in either direction and you're not going to come to a consensus on what they're trying to express in these passages and in what they're saying. And so for me, that it really annoys me when it's said in a preaching way. And I don't know. So here we go. Me as I think I am, and me as I am in fact. Sorrow, in other words, and the ending of sorrow. 1/3, more or less, of all the sorrow that the person I think I am must endure is unavoidable. It is the sorrow inherent in the human condition, the price we must pay for being sentient and self-conscious organisms, aspirants to liberation, but subject to the laws of nature, and under orders to keep on marching through irreversible time, through a world wholly indifferent to our well-being, towards decrepitude and the certainty of death. The remaining 2/3 of all sorrow is homemade, and so far as the universe is concerned, unnecessary. I feel that could be reduced to maybe 2 sentences. And I've noticed in this sort of thing, when it is just one continuous long sentence, it's like they're trying to jam pack in all of their thoughts into one thing, and I just do not get it. Anywho, so that made the second third of the book, I suppose, not enjoyable, but it did feel like it was setting it up for the final third, which I would compare to finding golden nuggets in a stream full of diamonds. You're going through, and to be honest, all of it is really good. The writing just flows so smoothly. You can see the own processes in Will Farnaby's head, how he's starting to connect the dots of why this place works so well. But also, it's not a particularly utopian book. They come to the acknowledgements of how their society is also struggling. There's bad things in it. There's death. There's, I assume there's murder. They don't particularly go into it. There's death, but there's certainly all the parts of life that do affect us normal human beings. And you see this keenly with the dying of one of the matriarchs, I guess, of the island, and her gradual decay into nothingness, and her last final days of living. And I suppose it's not a utopian book, but it can come across in that second third of the book as like that. But at the end, I suppose it brings it full circle and shows why utopias are almost necessarily a dream, because the world is a cruel place, and entropy itself will ensure that you can never find that, I suppose, final one particular thing that's ideal. That is the heaven on earth, I suppose. So I'll just get into a couple of the things, 2 of the things that I found really interesting in it. And like I mentioned before, there's definitely parts in a book where, if it's really well written, and it won't necessarily be the same parts for everyone, but you'll come across something and it'll just blow you away. Like, it'll just physically stop you, and something in your brain will click and go, whoa, that's very interesting, and that's worth thinking about. So for me, it came at a certain point. I can't exactly remember where in the book, but he's talking with one of the maybe school teachers or one of the leaders of the island, and they're talking about how they've used birth control to, I suppose, limit the amount of suffering, and that's why they don't have to rely on the oil and the money coming in, because they keep themselves at like a self-sufficient level. And he makes this point where it's almost like morality comes after a certain level of prosperity. And this book was written in 1962, and I've recently read Enlightenment Now by Steve Pinker, and he goes through in that book about sort of, it was his way of trying to show why the world is getting better as a place. And he has all these graphs, all of them, showing the general signs of things getting better. People are getting wealthier. People are getting healthier. They're living longer. And with all these sort of physical signs of prosperity, he's also showing how, morally speaking, we seem to be getting better as well. People in wealthier nations are more concerned about the environment, the amount of violence and theft, and the level of trust in I suppose the typical Western countries has for the last 15 years just absolutely exploded in terms of how much progress has been made on morality points that I think most rational and sane human beings could consider, okay, that's a good thing. I understand that if you have two people who see, let's just pick a very fundamentalist Muslim and a rabid atheist, they're going to have points where, morally speaking, they are very on different ends. But I think both of them could agree, death is kind of a bad thing. Murdering someone is kind of a bad thing. And what just blew me away was, he sort of came to this conclusion that it's almost like you need to have the prosperity to then be able to think about the morality afterwards. Because when you're poor, you've got 10 kids and you're struggling to feed them, you don't have a lot of time to think about the environment. You don't have a lot of time to think about how is this benefiting me and humanity as a whole. So I found that very interesting, very interesting. The other part was the prevalent emphasis on meditation and psychedelics in this book. So the people of Pala use a mushroom called the moshka mushroom, something like that. And essentially it's the same as psilocybin. It gives a perspective on things, is one way to put it. And so the final climax of the book is when Will Farnaby takes the moshka medicine, and sorry, they use medicine instead of mushroom. It's because in their minds it is a way of healing, and both in a spiritual sense, of I suppose decluttering your mind, opening it up to possibilities, and realizing that this world that we see around us, the atoms, the physical things, there is a subjective inner world as well. And trying to find that balance between those two worlds is, one of the probably most important parts of being a human, and trying to figure out what's what and find a way to live in both worlds simultaneously. And so he uses this, and what I like is that it's not just a simple, easy view of psychedelics are awesome, you should use them. Because they acknowledge these things are powerful. These things, if you go on a bad trip, you're going to experience a lot of mental anguish. You're going to potentially scar yourself mentally for a long, long time, and physically if you do stupid things while on these mushrooms, on these drugs. And yeah, I suppose just the emphasis that runs throughout the book is the complexity of things. You can't just look at things on one point and that's it. It's a yes or no from here. While also emphasizing the need for balance in most respects. So for me, those two things just hit it home for me, and what made this book a very, very enjoyable read. Once again, you can't, with books like this and with these book reviews, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything that occurred in the book. And, there's a lot of things I'm skipping over here. I'm skipping over how they viewed religion, how they viewed sex, how they viewed depression and self-destruction, the emphasis on some of the socialist policies that they had, such as the mutual adoption club, which is where it's almost like everyone can have their own family. So you can have multiple fathers, you can have multiple brothers and sisters and mothers. And, if you're having a fight in your traditional, in your blood-related family, you go to somewhere else, and you can get that break from the normal everyday routine, I suppose. And it's sort of like a collective way of sharing the load between everyone to ensure that the kids are raised in a healthy manner. They also have the spreading of labor, so no one works the same job for their whole life. They do something for 2 years, then they go and do something else. And in their society, which is not highly specialized, this is a doable task. There's enforced wealth limits, so they cannot rise above, I think, 4x the amount of the standard, the average Balinese. So you don't get these crazy differences in wealth that you'll see in the Western world, where the top 1% have 87% of the wealth or whatever it is. So overall, it was a decent book. I enjoyed reading it. It was, like I said, 336 pages, so it will take a little bit of time to get through, but nothing too crazy. I suppose what I should say with that is it's relatively small size, so it's not a mammoth book like you'll get with any of Tolstoy's things. Overall, and my rating system, because it's easy and I like doing systems, I'm going to rate it as well. So I'm giving it a 7.5 out of 10. My rating system, I suppose, if you, it would be mostly based on a bell curve type of thing. So if you've got your peak in the middle and then your tails at the end, I'd probably rate, or almost never rate anything 9.5. 10 is like almost impossible. There'll maybe be a couple of 9.5s, 8s. Then it starts to get more into the 7s. Probably 6 is about my midpoint. So a 6 would be like me teetering on whether it was worth reading or not. And then going down 5, 4, 3, 2. And same for 1. It's not something I really would give a book. It would have to, be a book absolutely just trashing me personally and saying, basically holding every single view that I do not hold, and then at the end calling me a faggot. So that's my book review of Island by Aldous Huxley. Turned out to be quite a big one. I'm going to try and shorten this up in the future, but no, maybe not. This was a good way to get a lot of my own thoughts out into I suppose something a bit more concrete. So hope you enjoyed.